can stop people from getting their unemployment checks, just think about how hard it is just to pass health care legislation. And I think that's part of the argument, right? That if Jim Bunning can do this to something entirely non-controversial, then there's no way to actually get this through unless we just get an up or down vote.
Chris, John Kyle's comments seem important to me here because It's not. John Kyle weighed in not just by saying, as Jeff Sessions and John Cornyn did, that they think Jim Bunning is a brave guy. He actually weighed in on the substance and said that unemployment benefits are a bad idea because they're a disincentive for people working, which strikes me as telling somebody that it's going to rain because they're all wet.
Yes.
Isn't that sort of setting up the narrative for 2010 for Democrats? I mean, there's the hypocrisy stuff, but also Republicans want to get rid of unemployment. They want to get rid of COBRA. They want to get rid of Medicare. They want to get rid of Social Security. Is that going to be the narrative for Democrats?
I really, really hope so, if Democrats are smart enough. I mean, look, you had Rand Paul, who is the Republican candidate and the Tea Party hero and son of Ron Paul, holding a rally outside Jim Bunning's office today with his supporters basically saying, go Jim Bunning. You have Tea Party leaders being quoted in the paper today saying, yeah, this is what we stand for. This is what the Tea Party movement that's taking over the Republican Party stands for. They don't want you to get unemployment insurance. They think it's a bad thing. They think it's some statist encroachment. And the fact of the matter is that is a view that is wildly outside the mainstream of America, and it's incumbent upon Democrats and progressives to make that connection to people. This is what these people believe. This is what this movement that's powering the Republican Party believes, and it's really, really out there.
Yeah, it's not just random anger. They actually have an agenda, and if you vote for that agenda, this is what you're going to get. Yeah. Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation, using both exculpates and Michigas before you use the Tarantino in a Senate. 3 stars. Thank you, Chris.
Score. Thank you.
Health reform is going to pass. It's going to pass. It passed the House already before Christmas. It passed the Senate on Christmas Eve with 60 votes. The next step is to bridge the differences between the two bills so the president can get something on his desk to sign. In order to do that, 2 things will happen. First, the House will pass the Senate version of the bill, and then there will be a small package of tweaks to that bill that will be passed by the Democrats under majority rules. All appearances are it's going to happen. There are things the Republicans can do to yell and scream about it. There are ways they can try to slow it down. There are epithets they can scream at it and crowds to be whipped into bloodthirsty fear about it. But it's going to happen. All that's left is to procedurally see it through. And, of course, to pop the popcorn and watch the people opposed to health reform lose their minds over the fact that this is one that they have lost. For example, Senator Charles Grassley, the Republicans' point person in the Senate on health reform, has now started denouncing his own proposal for a mandate that people buy insurance. It's Charles Grassley's own idea, which he is now denouncing as unconstitutional. Senator Grassley taking a brave stance against himself. And there's Senator Lamar Alexander, who Senate Republicans have been trying to elevate into a prominent position on health reform since maybe Senator Grassley needs some help. Lamar Alexander is now denouncing the use of reconciliation to get around the fact that Republicans are filibustering health reform. He's denouncing it as a political kamikaze mission. A mission, it should be noted, that Senator Alexander himself has flown many, many times when he voted for things under reconciliation rules. It's amazing, actually, that he's still around to be so hypocritical after flying all those kamikaze missions. Then there's Senator John McCain, who's proposing now to change Senate rules so that no one could use reconciliation rules to get around a filibuster when they're voting on something that involves entitlement programs like Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. John McCain's own record of voting yes on those types of votes that he now wants to ban is apparently not holding the senator back from taking this strong stance against his own behavior. Lamar Alexander, Chuck Grassley, John McCain, these are not newbies. These are senators who have been around the block. These are guys who book themselves on the Sunday talk shows instead of the other way around because they're such respected, respectable members of the political establishment. I thought these were the people who were supposed to take seriously, and yet they're just trying to get away with really, really, really blatant hypocrisy on this subject. I don't get it. Do they think that they're so respected, they're so mainstream that no one's going to fact check them? They're above that or something? Take another example. Take Senator Orrin Hatch. Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah has just published an op-ed in the Washington Post that has so many blatant, outright, laugh-out-loud falsehoods in it that it made me wonder if maybe there's a deal or something where if you're a United States Senator, if you're a United States Senator who's been in office for 33 years like Orrin Hatch has, you just don't get fact-checked anymore in the Washington Post. They just agree to let you print whatever you want. Is that the rule? Because if that isn't the rule, how else do you explain this? This is Orrin Hatch from the Washington Post. The use of reconciliation to jam through this legislation against the will of the American people would be unprecedented in scope, and the havoc wrought would threaten our system of checks and balances, corrode the legislative process, degrade our system of government, and damage the prospects of bipartisanship. Doesn't it sound horrible, this reconciliation thing? Senator Orrin Hatch sure makes it sound awful. Senator Orrin Hatch, who voted for a reconciliation bill in 1989 and in 1995 and in 1996 and in 1997 and again a second time in 1997 and again in 1999 and in 2000 and in 2001 and in 2003 and in 2005 and then again in 2005 and then in 2007. Now he says that doing what he's done all those times would wreak havoc. Orrin Hatch then goes on to admit that, yes, both parties have used the process, he says, but only when the bills in question stuck close to dealing with the budget. In instances in which other substantive legislation was included, the legislation had significant bipartisan support. That is a total, utter, complete, 100% unambiguous lie. It is a lie. It is an L-I-E, and I do not mean the Long Island Expressway. It is not the truth. Maybe I'm naive. I find it hard to believe they think they can get away with stuff like this. In 2003, Republicans used reconciliation to get the Bush tax cuts passed. The tax cuts that exploded the deficit. They did not get significant bipartisan support for that. They passed it with 50 votes. Dick Cheney had to come in as vice president and president of the Senate to break that tie to give him 51. 2 years later, another reconciliation vote, this time on Medicaid. Republicans were only able to get that one passed using reconciliation, too, because they only got 52 votes for that one. Significant bipartisan support. When Orrin Hatch says, hey, we never used reconciliation for big substantive bills when the vote was going to be close, and when he says that would be unprecedented, he is not telling the truth. It is a lie. Health reform passed the Senate by 60 votes. It passed the House by a majority. And now Democrats are going to pass the last fixes to align the two bills using reconciliation. Republicans used reconciliation a lot for major legislation. They did it all the time, and they're now lying about that record. Orrin Hatch in particular has been there voting with them while they did it just about every single time. And now Orrin Hatch is lying about that in the Washington Post. And the Washington Post is just printing the lying. Who knows? Maybe they'll run a correction. But meanwhile, Chuck Grassley, Lamar Alexander, John McCain, Orrin Hatch, all these guys are taking brave stands in public against their own positions, against their own voting records, against their own purported beliefs. It's one thing to not want health reform, to not want the other party and a president from the other party to get a legislative win. You don't want them to be seen as addressing the problems of the country with a policy that might really help people. It's one thing to try to stop it. It is another thing entirely to expect us to suspend disbelief while you pretend you're doing this for principled reasons. At this point, you're a guy on a loudspeaker scolding us to keep our voices down. You're the speed-eating hot dog kid telling us to go vegan. You're a family values chastity lecturing lecher. You're hypocrites. You are not making serious arguments, and you do not believe what you're saying. It's disproven by your record. In the case of Orrin Hatch, you are flat out lying about the history of the tactic that Democrats are going to use to pass health reform. And that is doing that, lying about what's been done, lying about the record, lying about this tactic is not actually a substitute for just making an honest argument against health reform. For the Washington Post to print something like this is bizarre. For these established, supposedly mainstream senators to try to get away with this is an insult to everyone they're addressing and to the media in particular. And for us all to just let this slide and call it politics is to surrender to cynicism profoundly. Listen, health reform is going to pass. Chuck Grassley, Lamar Alexander, John McCain, Orrin Hatch, you can't stop it. You can't stop health reform. You tried, but you can't. but you can stop embarrassing yourselves with the blatant hypocrisy and the lying. Come on, get serious. The country needs real debate. The country needs real opposition. The country needs you guys to grow up here. President Obama is tomorrow expected to make clear that he wants Democrats to use budget reconciliation rules to get around the Republican filibuster in order to pass health reform. That means it will take 50 votes, a majority, to pass the final tweaks to the bill, not 60. Today, in advance of that announcement, the president made a point of publicly embracing a handful of Republican ideas for health reform. In a letter to House and Senate